We're going to continue our study that we've been in for the last several weeks. We're going to be going to the 19th chapter of Matthew again, if you want to begin to turn there. Jesus has just presented in those first few verses God's ideal plan for man and woman. That plan was a monogamous, lifelong relationship between one man and one woman, as long as life shall last. But the Pharisees, we saw, were not interested in the divine ideal that Jesus presented. They were only interested in exceptions to that. And so they came back to Jesus, well then why did Moses command divorce? And as we saw the last time, Moses permitted divorce. It was not God, but Moses. It was never God's original design any more than polygamy was. Moses did not command it, he allowed it, but Jesus said from the beginning it was not so. It was never God's plan, it was permitted, we saw, because of the hardness of their hearts. And thus that was one of the things that Paul would have been talking about in Acts when he said the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent. Now that we have considered the discussions between Jesus and the Pharisees the last time, today we're going to turn our attention to the response from his disciples over this discourse. I must add a disclaimer as we begin. The title of my sermon has nothing to do with my daughter's wedding tomorrow. It is not good to marry. Those are not my words. I'm simply quoting the disciples, and we'll see the significance of this as we begin reading in verse 8 of Matthew now. Matthew 19, verse 8 says, "And he said to them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, commits adultery, and whoso marrieth her, which is put away, doth commit adultery. And his disciples say unto him, If the case of the man be so with his wife, it is not good to marry." In other words, if you can't get rid of her when you want to, you're better off not to get one of them things. They were missing the point entirely. Remember, the disciples, my friends, lived in a society where divorce was rampant. And so the statements of Jesus left them rather startled and struggling. This was foreign to their way of thinking and to the very thinking of that period of time. The things that they had been taught, Jesus had just told them those things are all wrong, guys. In their time, divorce was considered a virtue rather than an evil. For example, these are some of the common teachings of the rabbis from that period. Among those who will never behold the face of hell is he who had a bad wife. You see, such a man will be saved from hell because he'd expiated himself here of his sins by having to live with that woman down here. Another one, a bad wife is like leprosy to her husband. And what was the cure? Well, let him get a divorce and get cured of his disease. Another one here. If a man has a bad wife, it is his religious duty to divorce her. These are the things the people had been taught during that period of time. So can you imagine, my friends, your children being raised with the teaching that if you get a bad wife and you don't like her, divorce her. You don't like your husband, divorce him. Can you imagine your children being taught that? They are being taught that. That's exactly what the children of this society today are being taught. And so were the disciples. And so now all of a sudden along comes Jesus, and he presents this very interesting statement: no divorce except for adultery, and to get one and get a remarriage is to commit adultery. And so they hear this very narrow, very hard standard, and they reply in expiration. Well, then it's better not to get married. If you get into that union and you can't get out of it when you want to, it'd be better never to get into it at all, they're saying. I think they're kind of right in one aspect. If you don't know what you're getting into, you better not get into it to begin with. And if you're thinking on getting into it without the intentions of it being a lifelong union, you better not get into it either. I mentioned before some of these ministers that have told people that are getting married, well, if it doesn't work out, you're young, you can always get a divorce and start over again. Terrible things that are going on today. The biggest problem with marriages today, friends, is that they are not entered into for the right reason. In today's culture, people pursue romantic feelings, romantic emotions. It's the hearts and flowers, infatuation, puppy love, cloud nine type things. It's all that's promoted anymore. Even when I hear little bitty kids, 4 or 5 years old, talk about how sexy things are. Well, I told somebody the other day, I said, Mom, there is an authority on what is sexy. A little kid down there, probably 2 feet tall, talking about sexy. What kind of a society? People go through life being governed by one emotion after another, pursuing these romantic feelings. And then I hear people say often, well, my love for him or for her is dead. Well, what is love? As I read Corinthians, it says love never dies. It never fails. It's always there. Amen. So something's wrong then. They don't understand what love is, because true love does not die, according to the Word of God. Amen. And I don't care what people say, I'm going to believe the Word of God. Amen. Sociologists have declared that all love dies. But I think what they refer to is sometimes all that giddy romantic emotion tends to fade away. Let me ask you something, wives, please don't raise your hands, but how many of your husbands treat you exactly like they did when you were dating or when you were first married? They don't do that. You see, if a husband had to keep up that type of activity for 40 or 50 or 60 years, he'd drop dead. There's not a human being that can do that kind of pursuing every day of their life. They can't do it. That doesn't mean there isn't love for you. Love, like other things, tends to mature. And that giddiness is changing into something that is far more enduring. Let's turn the tables for a minute, though. Husbands, how about your wives? You know, that same giddiness is not there because your love is growing and it is encompassing more every day of your life. That is not to say that these things don't come back once in a while, because they do, and that is good. But there is still something more to it than that. It grows. From time to time it reoccurs, and that's great. But when people make relationships based upon that high euphoria of romantic feelings, and then lose that feeling, they begin to go to somebody else to look for that feeling again. As a result, we're producing a generation of disoriented, lonely, unloved, isolated kids who are turning into criminals and misfits because they do not have any meaningful, long-term relationships to identify with in their families anymore. If you get married because of an emotional feeling, you're making a big mistake. There should be some of that, but you need to be able to see beyond that to virtue and to character and to values. Common spiritual values, common life values. Understanding you are making that lifelong commitment. Extremely essential. Today, many are settling for a cheap substitute for what God desires for them. The mindset of so many is nothing more than shoes under my bed. You know, I could not believe, first time I ever heard that expression was in a song back in the 70s. You can put your shoes under my bed anytime, some old country western song. And I thought that was bad enough, but I'm coming from a concert on one of our institutions one night, a real great concert, and we're all walking down the street there in one of our Adventist ghettos and one of our institutions, and there were a couple of women in front of me. And at that time, I was just in my mid to late 70s, and these folk in front of me I thought were quite old because they were in their late 30s, early 40s, and they were talking about one of the singers in that group and said, boy, he could put his shoes under my bed anytime. And I thought, my word. I heard the song before I'm a Christian. Now I'm a new Christian, and I'm not sure what the difference is between where I was and where I'm at. That mentality is so prevalent today. What kind of words are those supposed to be coming forth from a pure stream? You see, we must learn to see beyond the Hollywood glamour and romanticism, beyond the giddy and external, and look for character and values, those things which will endure. As I mentioned before, we tend to say we love our dogs, we love our cats, we love ice cream, we love our wife, we love our car. We don't know what love is anymore. We really don't have any idea. To many, love is nothing more than Hollywood's barnyard immorality. They even refer to their fornication as making love. The disciples had missed the point back then, like so many of God's people do today, and that is that marriage is sacred. It is to be entered into for life, and thus it should not be rushed into. And when you make that move, be sure you're looking for character and spiritual value. Be sure you're the one you're getting involved with has spiritual commitments as deep as your own. Or you may spend your whole life with one person trying to keep a relationship together. And friends, that is very, very hard. Again, remember, marriage is a very sacred thing. Now, I want to give you 6 reasons for marriage today. I refer to them as the 6 P's. And you won't be able to keep up with some of these things, but when you leave today, the ushers will have a handout for you with these 6 reasons, plus 9 reasons for something we'll be moving into in a moment. But the first purpose for marriage, we find, be fruitful therefore and multiply. Procreation is a purpose of marriage, and to do this outside of marriage is sin. Yeah, it may increase your food stamps and government aid, but it's sin. 35%, though, of childbearing couples today are sterilized because people do not want children intruding in their lives. Children are considered a hindrance, a restriction. But my friends, God knew that children would help bind a relationship. Nothing more clearly reveals the binding of 2 into 1 than seeing yourselves in that one that is born into that union. That does not mean you have children, though, and shove them off to someone else to raise for you. Second reason is pleasure. Paul tells us in Hebrews 13:4, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. Third one is purity, to avoid fornication. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 2 says, nevertheless, avoid fornication. Let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. You don't go running around like those barnyard animals. He says, though, if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it's better to marry than to burn. Fourth reason is provision. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for them. We read this a few weeks ago in Ephesians 5. So ought men to love their own wives as their own bodies. He that loves his wife loves himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, even as the Lord the church. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined to his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. In other words, guys, married just to go out there and scoop up all these women running around and to provide for them. But you do it one at a time, and you do it for life. Partnership. God said it is not good. The man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him. There is to be strength in that relationship, as we've studied previously. They were to strengthen one another's weaknesses, to point out and help each other through those weaknesses. You know, Mary has a wonderful way of pointing mine out. My wife is really gifted in that area. If she didn't, she wouldn't be a strength in helping me to overcome them. And then the sixth reason is the 6P is picture. It was referred to in our children's story today. We've studied it in Ephesians 5 a week or two ago. The wedding is a picture of Christ and his church. The whole metaphor of marriage is a symbol of Christ and his church, though has lost its power because the church is so rife with divorce and bound up marriages. The picture is distorted horribly today. You see, God ordained marriage for procreation, for pleasure, for purity, for provision, for partnership, and as a picture of his relationship with his church. He designed it to be full of love, blessed, fulfilling, and lifelong, and the disciples missed that point entirely. Verse 11, look at this. But he said unto them, all men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given. He's going to move into something we're going to handle or study next week. He says, not everyone can handle what's going to happen here next. These next few verses, I'm going to read them and then we'll come back to them next time. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men. And there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. And he that is able to receive it, let him receive it. Not everyone can handle singleness except those to whom it is given. Singleness is a gift. It is given to some people, not to all, not even to most. But it is a gift. And unless you can handle singleness, it is not the best thing for you. If God does give this to you, though, it's because he knows you can receive it and it's the best thing for you. In other words, friends, if you've ever played Cupid, remember the song? Cupid is what? Stupid. Stupid Cupid. God's people have got no business playing Cupid. Let God bring people together and let people keep their nose out of it. You want to try and get everybody married off. And there's nothing wrong with marriage if that's God's plan. But for some, it is not his plan. But we tend to put a stigma upon the unmarried. We even kind of form we divide the church tremendously in today's society. We have the singles, we have the men, we have the women, we have the golden agers. That's some old folk that are older than me, you know. We have all of these different divisions within the church, but the body is to be one, and we try to separate them all the time and make them feel like they don't belong within a particular group. If we're a family, I don't care who you are, we're all part of the same family, regardless of your age, your sex, your gender, that's the same thing, isn't it?
Amen.
There's nothing that is to separate us. But it's happening today. There's nothing wrong with singleness. It's good. As a matter of fact, the Apostle Paul would say, it's better. And we'll look at that a little later too. It is better. He says, if you are single, you give your life in service to Christ with no hindrances, no divided service. Those of us that are married, your spouse is going to have to get part of your time. And then not only that, you got kids that are going to get part of your time. And then not only that, you know what? 9 grandkids can take an awful lot of your time. And you've got to divide yourself between all of these things. But if you're single, there's you and there's God, and that's your ministry. That's your life. If you're single, you do not feel that God has called you to singleness, then keep looking. But for the right reasons, in the right places, for the right person, with the right motives.
Amen.
In the meantime, do not bemoan your singleness because you don't know what God's plan is for you. Be content in whatsoever state you are. Take your Bibles and go to Corinthians. I want you to just look at a few things today. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And we'll come back to these later because I'm going to go through them rather quickly. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and let's start with verse 7. Paul says, "For I would that all men were even as I myself, but every man has his proper gift of God, one after this manner and another after that." So Paul says, I'm content in the state I am, and I think that it'd be best for everybody to be like I am, but we don't all have the same gift. How many of you ever thought before that Paul had the gift of singleness? See, Paul had probably been married because he was a member of the Sanhedrin. He was a young member of the Sanhedrin. His wife may have died, we really don't know. But now Paul is single and he's planning on staying that way. Now watch in verse 8. "I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I." If you're able to handle this, if it's a gift that God has given you, stay that way and don't try to change God's plan for you. Okay, that's what he's saying. Drop down to verse 17. "But as God has distributed to every man, as the Lord hath called every one, so let him walk, and so ordain I in all churches." To which God has put you, where God has put you, function where you're at. Okay? Now verse 20. "Let every man abide in the same calling wherewith he is called." And then verse 24. "Brethren, let every man wherein he is called therein abide," what? With God. Wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, whatever your position, anything in your life, abide with God, where God has got you. And God will bless. Now, let's take a look at the advantages of singleness quickly in verses 32 to 35. Drop down, he says, "But I would have you without carefulness." In other words, I don't want you to be full of worry or care. Don't be full of care or carefulness. "He that is unmarried cares for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married cares for the things that are of the world, and how he may please his wife. There is a difference also between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares for the things of the Lord, but she that for the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she that is married cares for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I speak for your own profit, not that I may cast a snare upon you, but for that which is comely, and that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction." Those are some benefits of it. And we'll look at some of these again the next time we're together. I want to give you 9 points. These will also be on that paper you'll receive today. 9 points on how to live a victorious life as a single Christian. Conduct yourselves, first of all, as Christian men and women. Do not be loud and boisterous. Had a friend, still got a friend, but she used to worry all the time she wasn't married. This woman intimidated every man she came around. She was loud, she was aggressive, and men just tried to get away from her because I think they feared her. She tried all of these Adventist singles groups and all that, and she came calling to me frequently, "Pastor, I can't find a man." I said, "Well, maybe it's time you quit looking. Quit looking. If God's got one, He'll send him to you. Maybe you're one of those that have that gift." And she said, "Well, if I do, I don't want it." How often do we not want what God gives us, you see? But God knows what's best for us. The Bible says, "Be of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price." And especially, this is true of you ladies. Second point is channel your energy through physical work and spiritual growth. Don't allow any hours of idle temptation to set in. The third one, stay close to and accountable to a committed Christian friend. There's strength there. Don't do everything alone. The fourth one, pray for purity and study often. Number 5, don't seek only to get married. In other words, don't try to catch the first bus out or any airplane leaving the airport. Wait upon the Lord. Seek to honor Christ in your life, in your relationships and your friendships, and allow God to bring about a marriage. And number 6, guard what you allow your mind to access through your senses. And remember, you got all those senses. Be careful what you let enter into your mind, friends. Avoid all sex-mad, adulterous temptations. Stay away from things that will lead you into temptation. Number 7, avoid all potentially dangerous situations. In other words, Paul says, flee from them. Get away as quick as you can. Don't go to situations where you know you shouldn't be in certain places. Number 8, count on divine enablings to live righteously in this present evil world, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. Believe that God will give you victory. It's there for you. Every temptation, God's got the victory already there for you. And then number 9, praise God and be content in whatsoever state you are. Amen. Follow these principles. We're going to have at least one more session before we finish this series, and we're going to look and go through Paul's commentary on all of these teachings of Jesus that we've been studying. So I'd encourage you to study this through as deeply as you can over the next several, it'll be a couple of weeks before we're back together again. As you leave today, be sure and pick these up. They'll be at the back door as you exit. And our closing hymn today is one that I think is very pertinent to the time we're living in times like these. Number 593.
Shall we stand?